Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is History 150, part of the Great Big History series. And we're doing episode 3 on followers. So in episode 2, we did what is leadership? Well, an important part of leadership is followers. And so we have to talk about followers. And to have followers, you have to have legitimacy. So we have to talk about what is legitimacy. Legitimacy is the ability to get other people. It is the ability to get other people to accept your right. Legitimacy is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. Legitimacy is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. And we see this all the time in life. Think, moms, especially when you're young, what to wear, act, when to go to bed, where to be on certain days, or what to wear, act, and sleep on certain days. Employers tell you when, where, and how to work, when to eat, when to rest, even, especially if you're working a night shift, when to sleep. Employers tell you that, and you say, okay, you're paying me. That's legitimacy. Cops pull you over, ticket, and fine you. And most of the time, people accept their right to do so. Courts can fine you, take your freedoms, tell you when to speak, how to speak. Governments can tax you, conscript you, regulate you, make you follow their laws, whether you like them or not. And people accept that. That's having legitimacy. You accept their right to tell you what to do. So, what happens when you lose legitimacy? Well, if you have parents, if you've been a teenager, or you have teenagers, you know suddenly they stop listening to you. And it's a fight. When to come home, when to go to sleep, when to do your homework, what to wear. Oh, you're going to wear that? What if the police lose legitimacy? Well, you've lived through that. That was the protests in 2020 for George Floyd's murder. And so tens of thousands of people went into the streets and rejected the police legitimacy. The famous phrase came out was Black Lives Matter, but also defund the police. The idea was the police are getting too much money to do what they're doing, and we should take that money back and move it into other things. It didn't mean get rid of the police, but it meant putting money towards social services, mental health, and other places. But it was the idea that police officers had lost legitimacy. The American Revolution or the French Revolution, even though the painting is from the Revolt of 1830, it's always because of the flag and the dress and the idea of the storming the Bastille. It's always tied to the French Revolution, even though it's actually painted for a later French revolt. But Washington crossing the Delaware. Washington was a British officer who then waged war on British soldiers. Why? Because the King of England, because the British Empire had lost legitimacy in the 13 colonies. So what happens when you lose legitimacy? Nothing good. No, it may turn out in the very end to be something positive, but nothing good in the loss of legitimacy. 2% or so of Americans died in the American Revolution. The American Revolution wasn't good for them. They're dead. The French Revolution cut off a lot of heads of both rich and not so rich people. The French Revolution didn't turn out very well for them. And so the breakdown of order, the fighting, resistance, and backlash, it's fighting with your parents when you're a teenager. Now, the hope is that you find a new stability. So we get the American Revolution ends, and we get the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution. The French Revolution ends, and we get a republic, then an empire, then another republic. But that will get some stability. And when you get that stability, you regain legitimacy. Whether it's the old system that's been recreated, or, like in the United States and France after the French Revolution, a new system. That new system gains a new legitimacy. And that's what we're going to talk about. So, how do you go from old systems to new systems? The new leaders. Washington was not a leader prior to the American Revolution. He was an important guy in Virginia, but he was not a mover and shaker in the British Empire. And so suddenly he's now the father of the country, so to speak, right? He gets this new legitimacy that when he retires after his second administration, no other president until Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 150 years later, goes for a third, even though there was no law against it. And then when he did it, they made a constitutional amendment saying nobody else can ever do this again. That's how much respect and legitimacy Washington had. So we will see that the loss of legitimacy equals a resistance. So equals fighting against the old system, but also resistance of the old system. The old system doesn't want to be destroyed. The old leaders don't want to disappear. Then we get a violent backlash to try to enforce legitimacy, which equals a loss of more legitimacy, and maybe then the collapse of the entire system. So it's hard, once you start losing legitimacy, to get it back. So how does authority respond to resistance? So whether it's the protesters against Black Lives Matter, or the British government against the American Revolution, or conservative kings against the French Revolution, what we see is that the loss of legitimacy equals a resistance to authority. Then the backlash, many times to negotiate a retention of legitimacy. Okay, and parents do this all the time. Okay. Let's talk. Right? Okay, maybe the 9 o'clock curfew's too early. How about 10:30? Right? It's a negotiation. The Declaration of Independence, which you can go to Philadelphia and go see the room where it was written, is all about the idea that the American colonists tried to negotiate with the British crown, with the king, to get him to stop doing these terrible things. You want to keep us. Well, we don't want to revolt, but you're kind of making us look at what you're making us do, is the kind of attitude of the Declaration of Independence. But there's usually these negotiations. So we have Principal Skinner to Lisa Simpson in the Simpsons. Lisa, what are you rebelling against? He's asking so that he can negotiate it. Oh, well, if I'm against not enough mozzarella sticks during lunch, we can get you more mozzarella sticks, right? Just you settle down, let things go back to the way they were. We'll change a little bit, and there we go. Possibly that can lead to more loss of legitimacy, because even the act of negotiating is seen as weak and a reason to get rid of the system. And so you end up with then a violent backlash to try to enforce legitimacy. Spanking your kids. Closing down Boston Harbor with the British Navy. Sending in an army. What else? Detention, right? Detention. Most teachers, if you have seen it, some kid is acting up and it's like, please. I do the same thing. Please, come on. Take it outside. Just, it's a negotiation, right? But what if the negotiation doesn't work? Well, then you have to up your coercion, And ultimately, violence is the last level of that. Ultimately, violence is where it ends. If it keeps ratcheting up, it will end in violence. And usually violence equals the loss of even more legitimacy. So the closing of Boston Harbor and the sending of a British army to Boston to put down the protests made all the other American colonies freak out and went, whoa. Now conservatives went, well, Boston's getting what's coming to it. Those people are crazy. Those people are violent. They're looting. They're rioting. They're stealing stuff. They destroyed all the tea. That's millions of dollars worth of tea, of product, right? They're beating up the police. Like, we can't have that kind of chaos. But other people said, whoa. If they respond with that much violence to Boston, what are they going to do to us? And so the First Continental Congress gets together. So Lisa starts to rebel against authority. Marge and Homer try to negotiate with her proper behavior. And Homer's like, this is what teenagers do. Like, I know Lisa's 8, but, the show had been on 10 years by the time this episode comes on. They go through a phase. Don't worry about it. We can be flexible. Principal Skinner sits her down and asks, what are you rebelling against? He's willing to fix the problem peacefully. Miss Hoover gives her detention, extra work, and escalation in the punishment, which leads Lisa to steal all the teachers' editions with all the answers in it, figuring none of the teachers, the teachers teaching, don't know what they're teaching. They don't understand their own topics. And so without the teacher's edition, they'll be lost. Right? That leads to another escalation in punishment. Because now they're going to find out. They don't know Lisa has done it. They're going to find out who she has done it. And then they're going to throw her out of school. And they're going to... it's going to be another escalation. And in the end, Bart, her brother, takes the blame. And he takes the blame because he says, oh, Lisa, you love school. School's your thing. If you get thrown out of school, and in the end, it all wraps up in a nice little bow at the end of the half hour, and we never go back to it again. But you can see the ratcheting up. From Homer being like, it's not that big of a deal. Yes, it's rebelling against authority, but all right. We can handle it. The system can handle it. Principal Skinner's taking it more seriously. So we're ratcheting up, right? And each time they try to get Lisa to go back to the way things were, they lose more legitimacy. Lisa's actions against authority get more not violent, but they escalate. Her language gets worse. Her denial of authority gets more pronounced. In the end, she acts and steals. So nothing good. So here's the thing about followers, though. They're not unified. Which means leaders have to appeal to different wants of different factions. I had a mentee from Princeton, a graduate student, who wanted to get some teaching experience. And we were part of a program. And this is how I described it. This circle is essentially, it's not to scale, but it's essentially that there are concentric rings around you. You walk into any classroom with legitimacy, with authority. Why? Well, my PhD, my age, my experience, the school paying me. So the school has told the students, I can do a good job. My rank, that I went from assistant to associate to full professor, says I'm good at my job. The school is saying I'm good at my job, because if the school didn't think that, they wouldn't promote me. And so you come in with the trappings of legitimacy. And so I described it as there are 10% who will always be with you in a community college. 10%. That you have to really be bad to lose that 10%. They're the 10% that likes following the rules. They're the 10% that wants the education. They want to do the work. They enjoy the classroom experience of other classes. They are there for you. They might literally be there because your name was on the registrar. So you've got 10%. If you lose them, you are bad, and this is how you end up being Louis XVI and get your head cut off. Don't lose them. You can't lose them. It's very, very hard to lose them. But there's also 10% that you will never have. They're the people who text during class. They're the people who keeps their headphones on. They don't want to be there. They don't want to be in school. They want to be doing something else. They are there because something or someone is forcing them, is coercing them. It might be fate. It might be guilt. It might be their parents. We used to have, when I first started full-time teaching, I was surprised by how many students were there just to stay on the health care. Because before Obamacare was passed, you were allowed to stay on your parents' health care up to like 25. And health care costs, whatever, $10,000 in 2010, let's say. So it was cheaper for parents to send their kids to school with the hope that they would also get a degree that would help them make more money in the future. But it was cheaper to spend the $3,000 for 5 classes to be a full-time student than it was to pay for separate health care or to pay for the rider. But the student didn't really want to be a student. They had done elementary school. They had done junior high. They had done high school. They were done. They wanted to work. They wanted to make money. They wanted to go and live a life on a, Floridian beach. I don't know what they want to do, but they didn't want to be in my classroom. And that's 10%. It's not large. It's that 10%. Now that 10% many people choose to let that 10% that's against you, that you will never have, consume them. They spend all of their time because they know they got the 10% that's with them. So what they're constantly trying to do is get that 10% that's against them to conform. And here's the secret. They're never going to do it because they don't care. They don't like you. They don't like the structures. They don't like the system. They don't want to be there. So you will never have them. But then there's that 80% in the middle, and they're up for grabs. They have paid to be in school. They want to get a degree. Do they want to do all the work and it'll take all the time? At a community college level, probably not. There's a percentage in there that do, and there's a percentage in there that don't. And it's at that 80% is a big amorphous middle. The idea is you start with them, but you can lose them. And the first way you lose them is they stop coming to class. What's ironic is the 10% that's against you might always be in class because they're being forced to be there by something bigger than they are. That 80%, if you lose them, you lose legitimacy. If you keep them, you keep legitimacy. And so the fight isn't for the edges, it's for the big middle. The American Revolution happened when the King of England lost that middle. The French Revolution happened when the king lost that middle. And people said, I hate the king. And nobody told them to be quiet. And more people started to say, yeah, I don't like the king either. And so you have to appeal to them differently. The 10% that's with you, you appeal to their desires. Right? You appeal to things that make them like you already. Acknowledgement. The 10% that's against you, you have to not anger. Otherwise, you'll have an even bigger problem. And that 80%, you have to appeal to what they want, which might be different from both the 10% that's with you, but also from the other percentages that are up for grabs. Different people in that 80% want different things. Some want the degree. Some want the experience. Some want the skills to learn how to transfer into the work. They're all different. And as a leader, you have to try to satisfy them. So then what do followers want? No one really knows. I know. We started with what is legitimacy and no one really knows. And now we're talking about followers and what do followers want and nobody really knows. We have a $1 billion polling industry. If you paid any attention during the last presidential election, the 2024 presidential election, every day there were new polls coming out which purported to say this is what people want. We have high-paid consultants making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to tell politicians, to tell companies what people want. But even when you look at what they want, they don't all want the same thing. Democracy and the economy and terrorism and the Supreme Court justices, and you get 52% says is extremely important. But then 9% say, it's not important at all. How do you deal with that? Gun policy, 40% say it's extremely important. Another 40% say it's very important. So you're like, this will be very important. I will deal with this. But that still leaves 25%. 1 in 4 that shrug their shoulders and go, I don't really care. Which means anything you do, they will either not care about or be against. And the extremely important might be for what you want. It might also be against what you want. So even when it says extremely important, it's not really clear in what direction it's extremely important. So no one really knows. Because if people knew, you wouldn't need all these polls. You'd have one poll, and then you'd have basically you wouldn't need elections, because the person would listen to the poll, do all the stuff that people wanted, and be done. In the medieval world, we had church officials, local lords, and then parliaments where the king could bring people together. The church officials would get together every Sunday and not only do the liturgy, but do the news. And if people are like, more taxes, he'd write a letter and be like, in our area, in our parish, people are really angry about the new tax policy. And send it up the chain. And sometimes it wouldn't get to the official it's supposed to get to. Sometimes it wouldn't get to the king. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the king does something about it. Sometimes he doesn't. Many times they don't. But you have local lords who do the same thing. They're collecting taxes. They're going to the people. And their job is now they're more in touch with the king, because their power derives from their nearness to the king. Unless they are like one of those super kind of lords who own so much land somewhere that they can be standoffish. They're practically within their 100,000 acres. They're their own king. And those do exist. They get destroyed mostly by cannon later on. But what they like to do is, stay apart, maybe marry into the royal family. But they don't want revolts either. So they're also telling the king, hey, gotta be careful. There's parliaments where people literally of different groups get together. The lords, the church, in Sweden, they included the peasants, and tell the king, literally, here's a drawing of not only a church meeting, but also a parliament, the Polish parliament. And you have the different groups getting together and literally can tell the king the state of what's going on in the country. The Greek and Roman worlds had assemblies where the citizenry got together and voted on stuff. The Senate and the tribunes in the Roman world. The tribunes, whose name I don't have there, but tribune is Tribune. The tribunes literally were the representatives of the people. They went out into different parts of the city of Rome and would talk about what the Senate was doing and then bring back reports. And they had a right to veto what the Senate was doing if what the Senate was doing was so bad it might cause a revolt. Now, in the Greek and Roman worlds, you have to remember, the citizenry was also the army. The army were the farmers. They were the citizens who were also voting for their representatives or for the laws. And so it was much more direct than the medieval world, because you relied on those people. If those people weren't happy, you get a sit-down strike, and we may be talking about that a little later, about the Roman in the Roman Republic, where you literally get a sit-down strike where the people say, we're not going to do it. They see themselves as different from the government. So all of this is trying to find out what people want, need, and desire, or at least, if nothing else, how angry they are. Right? If you've ever had a fight with your mom and then slammed the door, you've told your mom how angry you are. You have said, you may have said it with words, but now you're saying it in deeds, just how angry you are. And now your parents, your mom could go, okay, how do I respond to that? Sometimes they respond with anger. Sometimes they respond with negotiations. Sometimes they just never talk about it again and they just sublimate it. So leadership is complicated. one must accomplish one's personal leadership goals. Leaders want to get stuff done. Maybe they want to go down in history. Well, maybe they want to have great stories. Maybe they want to be like their dad. Cambyses wants to be like his dad, Cyrus. They want to accomplish their personal goals. But one must also help followers accomplish their goals. But helping one group may hurt your legitimacy with another group. We see this with parliaments all the time. Helping the lords makes the peasants mad. Helping the peasants makes the lords mad. When we talk about, I'm hoping that we're going to spend some time talking about my Swedish kings for my dissertation. They were experts at balancing everybody off. That for the part of the Swedish Empire from 1617 to 1721, for that 100 years, the kings and Queen Christina, the queen, are experts at balancing one group against the other and holding on to legitimacy for themselves. Other kings, not so much. When Louis XVI of France has the beginnings of a revolt and sides with the lords, the peasants form their own assembly and then rejected the power of the king entirely. So you have to know that helping one group may upset the other. Parents of multiple kids, if you have 2 or 3 kids, deal with this all the time. If you have multiple, like dogs or cats, you're dealing with this. If you give a treat to one dog, but not the other, the second dog knows you didn't give them a treat. They know it's unfair. So you have to help your followers accomplish their goals, but you have to also know that helping one group may hurt your legitimacy with a different group. And we are hoping we, as the leaders, or the followers themselves, know what the followers want. You'll see this all the time with the parent where the people say we want X, and the leader's like, they don't really want X. They want Y. They want this other thing. I know them better than they know themselves. Also, and leaders need to be aware that their followers' feelings regarding legitimacy, but also not get trapped in trying to please them all the time. In our episode 2, What is Leadership?, we talked about the master and commander scene between the doctor and the captain, Russell Crowe playing the captain. And the doctor's like, no, let's placate the sailors. Their lives suck already. And the captain's like, no, they need discipline. They need punishment when they do wrong. It may be harsh on the guy being punished, but everybody else has to know that it's harsh and that they might be punished as well. There's a story. It's apocryphal. It's in the Ken Burns Civil War, where a soldier is brought before General Robert E. Lee for breaking some rule. Must have been stealing something. If you're going to be brought before the general. And as Shelby Foote tells the story, it's this regular soldier, this infantryman, is shaking and afraid of what will happen. And the General Lee sees him and says, "Don't be afraid. You'll get justice here." And the soldier responds, "Yes, sir, but that's what I'm afraid of." Which means the guy did it. And he's justice means he'll get what he deserves, but everybody knows he'll get what he deserves. That's why he's afraid, because he's going to get punished. He knows he did wrong, but so we have to accomplish our own goals. We have to help our followers accomplish their goals, which is more complicated than just giving them stuff. And we have the problem that we may not know what we want or what our followers want. And we have to be aware of how our followers feel about legitimacy. and not get trapped in just trying to please them. Because pleasing them may hurt our legitimacy. So how can followers deny consent? A sit-down strike. They can literally just sit down. They cannot do the work. We see this in business all the time, right? We see strikes where the workers refuse to do the work. The Roman army in 450 BC, the Senate declared a war, and the army went and mustered and then sat and it refused to fight. And the patricians, the rich guys, said, but we're at war. And the plebeians, the soldiers, the regular folk said, no, you're at war. We didn't vote to go to war. You voted to go to war. And the Senate said, but the Gauls are going to come and they're going to take your stuff. And the regular soldiers said, no, we're poor. They're going to come and take your stuff, which was true. And so the senators go, well, what do you want? And what they wanted was the law that to protect regular people as well as it did the rich. So the law at that point, like the Code of Hammurabi, which we'll talk about a little bit, treated rich people better than it treated poor people. The punishments were harsher on poor people. And the poor people said, no. We want the law to treat rich and poor exactly the same. We want poor people to be treated nicely like the rich. We don't need the rich to be treated worse. We want to be treated better. And the senators agreed because they, in the end, weren't going to lose. They weren't going to be treated worse. The law was still going to protect them. And that's our idea of the law. Our idea of the law comes back from a sit-down strike, that the law should treat rich and poor equally. Now, does it always work that way? No. But the theory is, and it's written into the law, that it should. You could refuse the work. You could just not show up. We see that at the end of the pyramid building age in Egypt, where more and more Egyptians, 20,000 or 50,000 or 100,000, you'll see different numbers, show up for Khufu. But 100 years later, you're getting 5,000 showing up. That they weren't interested. They weren't being paid enough to do the work. They just don't show up. Or, in the case of sabotage or Luddites, they slow down. They do the work very slowly. Or they break the machines. That's where we get sabotage from. A sabot is a wooden shoe that they would throw into the gears of the machine, which would break the machine, and then the machine would be down for a day as other workers had to try to fix it. So you could either do work very slowly or just slow down the changes. You could work with enemies. We'll see this with Ming peasants who revolted against the Ming emperor. And what did? They allied with the Manchu warriors beyond the Great Wall and opened up the gates of the Great Wall so that these foreign warriors, who are not Chinese in any way, could invade China to overthrow the Ming emperor. Roman plebeians, who were demanding dignity and not welfare, joined private armies of Sulla and Caesar and actively fought against the Senate. For 500 years, Roman plebeians, Roman citizens, fought for the Senate. But in the last 100 years, plebeians joined armies against the Senate. Benedict Arnold, perhaps America's best battlefield general during the American Revolution. But he was slighted, humiliated, wounded. He was out of money. He had a new, very attractive and very charismatic British loyalist wife. And he had a grudge. He had a grudge against Washington for not helping him. He had a grudge against the other American generals that were being better treated by the press and better treated by Congress. And so he worked with the British. to sell out both West Point as a fort, but also to hope to capture George Washington. He betrayed not only the United States, well, it wasn't the United States yet, not only America, the American Revolution, but he personally betrayed George Washington. And finally, we can have mass revolt and revolution. The peasants' revolts against their lords, that happened all the time in the medieval age. We see it most clearly in the 1520s in Germany, but also against Henry VIII. The French Revolution, the Box Revolution in China in 1900, the Russian Revolution in 1917. Some members may simply seek to change leadership, but increasingly a lot of people want to change the entire system. So we see that in all of those examples, the peasant revolts, the French Revolution, the Boxer Revolution, Russian Revolution, that they may start as a way of simply changing leadership, but they end with trying to change the entire system. So good leadership means having good followers and enthusiastic supporters. We see this with Caesar versus Pompey. Pompey had a better army. He had a larger army. He had the Senate. He had legitimacy on his side. But they weren't enthusiastic to fight for him or against Caesar. Whereas Caesar's legions were very enthusiastic. They had just won wars in Gaul. They wanted to fight for Caesar. They were on Caesar's side. So you have to have good followers, but also enthusiastic supporters. You have to keep those followers on your side, especially that unenthusiastic middle percent, that group that's in the middle, that's willing to follow you if you don't mess it up. And then you have to help your followers achieve their own goals as well as your goals. And that requires balance. So we kind of see this with Homer Simpson. Homer's one of the best episodes is where Homer Simpson basically goes and works for a Bond villain. And Homer's good at it. Homer's good at managing. So he walks in and goes, "Hey, are you guys working?" And they go, "Yes, sir, Mr. Simpson." So we see good workers and enthusiastic supporters. So he goes, "Could you work harder?" And they say, sure thing, boss." And they start doing it. And he's like, "I'm good at this." But then he gives them, "Call me Homer." Hey, call me Homer. Which means he's trying to make a personal relationship with his workers. That he's not trying to be the standoffish boss, the leader up on high, the commander. He's going to be the friend leader, the one who's going to help them achieve their goals. Not only are they going to work hard, not only are they going to help a Bond villain take over the world, but gosh darn it, they're going to get the respect of their manager. And it also means bringing in new followers to replace followers who have retired or left or died, or who reject consent. Ironically, that's the girlfriend subplot in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Cliff, Brad Pitt, meets this very attractive hippie girl who's a member of Charlie Manson's family. They call it the family. Charlie Manson's cult. And she's trying to recruit him. She sees Cliff. He's strong. He's handsome. He's bright. He's very capable. And so there's this idea of, I really wanted Cliff to meet Charlie. This idea that it would be good to get Cliff to be part of the cult. So you have to bring in new followers because you're always losing followers. They're aging out. They're passing away. They're turning from, that part of that 80% into the 10% that don't like you, because they feel slighted. They don't have to be Benedict Arnold, but there's plenty of people who grumble too. You know, so you need new followers who try to balance out and are going to replace the followers who have retired, who have left. So it's complicated to be a leader and to be a follower and to keep followers on your side. So thank you, be safe, and see you in the next episode, in which we start talking like history. We're going to go back and talk about different kinds of leadership. We're going to start with protective and personal, but we're going to go back to the beginnings of basically time to start there and then kind of move forward and show examples. And we'll talk about things getting from the ancient world towards the modern world. So thank you very much. Be safe. And I'll see you next time.